Welcome to another episode of Eric Waite Whiskey Studies. This is part 3 on my series on Scotch whiskey history. And in this video, we're going to talk about the Ferintosh Exemption. And while I am sharing with you my notes, I'm going to be enjoying a dram of the Ardbeg and Oa. I've already reviewed this whiskey. It's lighter peat than other Ardbeg expressions, and it has spent some time in Pedro Jimenez cask. So it's a little less peaty, a little sweeter, and I think it's a great entry-level whiskey for those who are maybe just sort of getting their toes wet for the first time in peated whiskeys, and I think it really fills a nice niche in the Ardbeg lineup. I like this, I would say, a sort of an after dinner. If you want something a little bit sweeter, I also like to combine this with some of the other Ardbegs to perhaps back out the peat a little bit and bring a little bit more sweetness to them. Alrighty, let's get into our study of the Ferintosh Exemption. And just another reminder, our textbook for this is The Science and Commerce of Whiskey by Ian Buxton and Paul Hughes. Alrighty, so in 1784, the Wash Act reduced duty and simplified regulations regarding the production of legal whiskey, though one consequence of it was the ending of this somewhat bizarre Ferintosh Exemption. You might say, what the heck is the Ferintosh Exemption? The Ferintosh story is unique in Scottish distilling history, as the Forbes family of Culloden near Inverness, who owned the whiskey-making operation, were granted exemption from payment of normal excise duties from 1690 until the passing of the Wash Act. Wait a minute, you're telling me the government wasn't requiring taxes from someone? There's gotta be a trick in there somewhere. Duncan Forbes was a staunch supporter of Protestant King William III, who deposed Catholic James II in 1688, and his estates were laid waste during the Jacobite Rebellion in favor of James the following year, with the damage valued at £5,400 Scots or £4,500 sterling being caused to Ferintosh Distillery. By way of compensation, the Scottish Parliament granted Forbes the right to distill at Ferintosh in perpetuity of payment of 400 marks Scots per year. Alrighty, so in the backdrop here, got a little Protestantism versus Catholicism going on here. Got a little bit of politics going on here. Got a little bit of back payment for support, But overall, what this later proved is that the people really liked it, whether Protestant or Catholics, because it meant they got plentiful, less expensive whiskey. Ultimately, Duncan Forbes had 4 operational distilleries on his estates, producing 123,965 proof gallons, or 563,556 liters in 1780, while 217,901 proof gallons, or 598 liters, were recorded as being made in other licensed distilleries. In other words, Forbes was responsible for making more than 50% of the total dutiable Scotch whiskey. There was well-developed East Coast trade, shipping, for example, barley to London brewers, so it would have been relatively easy to ship Ferintosh south. Let's take a wee bit of sip because my throat is getting parched. Really chocolatey too. Following the implementation of the Wash Act, the amount of momentary compensation awarded to the Forbes family, £21,580, was decided upon by a jury before the Scottish Court of Exchequer. Now, what I'm about to tell you about now is a name, if you don't already know, you really should know about Scotch whiskey history and culture, because there is a celebration of Robert Burns Day, a poet in Scotland. In his poem, Scotch Drink, written in 1785, and the author's earnest cry and prayer of the following year, poet and lyricist Robert Burns articulated his feelings about the loss of Ferintosh privilege and the repressive state of the excise laws relating to whiskey in general. The Ferintosh, oh sadly lost, Scotland lament frae coast to coast. Now colic grips and barking host may kill us all. For loyal Forbes' chartered boast is taken away. The 1784 Wash Act introduced a precise geographical line between the Highland and Lowland producers for excise purposes, as one aim was to stimulate legal distilling in the Highlands and reduce smuggling. The Highland line ran from Firth of Tay in the east to the Firth of Clyde in the west and included Speyside region of production, later formally recognized as a whiskey making region in its own right. The distilling centre of Campbellton at Argyllshire was originally included within the Highland area for excise purposes, though in 1795 the definition was altered and Campbellton distillers subsequently paid duty at the higher lowland rate. Accordingly, lower rates of excise duty were applied to small-scale distilleries north of the line, which used locally produced barley, though their product was banned from being exported into the lowlands a year later in order to protect lowland distilleries from unfair competition. A very significant increase in legal distillation in the lowlands came about as a result of the Wash Act, accompanied by large-scale exports of whiskey into England in competition with the London distillers. After protests from the London Distillers Company, this trade was effectively ended by the imposition of prohibitively high levels of duty on spirits crossing the border into England in 1786. This, plus overproduction, led to disaster for the major legal concerns with the Stein and Hague-owned Kentipans, Kilbeggie, Kincaple, Cannon Mills, and Lochran distilleries all ceasing trading, along with their London agents Sandman and Graham. Together, these 5 distilleries were responsible for producing half of the country's whiskey output. Their total debts were close to £700,000, approximately £150 million in today's terms.
Whoa, this is the biggest house I've ever seen.
It's the Palace of Versailles, home of Marie Antoinette.
Vive la Révolution! Vive la Révolution! Oh, round up the aristocrats! The Queen and her aristocratic cronies must pay the price for their gluttony. We will slaughter them like the dogs they are. Off with his head!
Trebling of duty in 1793 to help pay for war with revolutionary France hardly improved the situation. And this led to the lowland distillers, which had recovered from the 1786 crisis, producing whiskey rapidly, with the quality of the product suffering significantly as a result. As the level of duty paid by lowland distillers was based on the theoretical annual capacity of stills, operators like the Steins developed broad, shallow stills which could be discharged quickly as many as 94 times per day, rather than the authorities' estimated 7 times per week. Profit margins rose with so little duty being paid, but the spirit produced was harsh and unpalatable, as stills easily boiled over a rascally liquor, according to no less an authority than Robert Burns, only fit for rectification into gin.
To alcohol, the cause of and solution to all of life's problems.
Alrighty, so there's a lot there to remember, but it's really, really important that we understand, and basically, even if you don't remember all the dates, if you can remember the cause and effects of government interference, what happens when there are food shortages, what happens when there's war, what happens when there's excessive taxes that takes place. These are common themes in the economics of both wine and whiskey. All right? Anytime the government does this sort of thing in interfering with whiskey, we tend to see these sort of problems. I know, get a little bit of political here, but that's not the only type of interference. We're going to see later, coming out of the United States, we had some pseudo-religious interference which sort of spawned Prohibition and so forth, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Alrighty, if you subscribe to this channel, I want to thank you very much. If you like watching my videos, I would greatly appreciate it if you would give it a thumbs up, share with your friends on Facebook, Twitter, and social networking channels. And the next time, we're going to get into more legal issues in the history of Scotch whiskey when we look at Beyond the Law. Cheers.